So good evening, gentlemen. This, of course, is the follow-on to last week's discussion or presentation where we spoke about coming to America. Okay, so last week we explored, of course, the journey from people's villages where they lived, in the various communities on the African coast. And we got to the point where they had arrived at the sea. Okay, and the trauma that they suffered, during that journey. Okay, so that's where we are. This week we're talking about them coming to America. Okay, we're kind of focusing on the Caribbean. Okay, because all of us are Caribbean people, and we'll explore what happened to people pretty much when they arrived here. Okay, so the purpose of course is to reveal information about what happened, when people were taken and brought here. Okay, upon arrival and after they arrived. Okay, many years after they arrived. And we'll also explore the mindset of the European people, okay, who were in control of this whole process. All right. So I want to start off with this statement from AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. All right. And when you go through trauma compounds on each other. And that has basically been the experience of people coming from, the African context over into the Americas. Okay, it's been trauma upon trauma upon trauma. Okay, pretty much nonstop. Okay, since day one. All right. Okay, so let's explore now the mindset of people back in the late 1500s or the 1500s in England specifically. Okay. So that in the late 16th and early 17th century, there was rapid population growth. Okay, you had agricultural depression, and that culminated in famine. All right, unemployment was high. Okay, it threatened agricultural workers as well as skilled artisans. The cost of living was high. Okay, and there was a fall in the value of wages. Housing was inadequate at best. Okay, so if you look at the picture below, right, that was the general scenario. All right, in cold or wet weather, fuel was a problem. It was scarce and expensive. Health scares were frequent, of course, regular outbreaks of tuberculosis and the plague. Okay, their efficient medical treatment was non-existent. Basically, people were very frustrated with the lavish lifestyle of the kings and the monarchs and so on. So you're a poor person or middle class person in England going through all this stress, and these people living it up. This, by the way, is a picture of the Spanish court, not necessarily the British court. I couldn't find a period picture of the British court at that time, but certainly this was the Spanish court at that time. Okay. And finally, the 30-year war between Protestants and Catholics, okay, reduced Europe to a corpse-strewn battleground. So it was really, a time of depression. Okay, now remember that Columbus and the Spanish and all of these people had already come to the Caribbean. Okay, pretty much 100 years. All right. So the New World was discovered and people decided to leave all the stress in Europe and so on. Okay. For several reasons. Okay, the Puritans left, of course, because of religious persecution. Okay. Some left, on the other hand, because of their own religious conviction. And I have here the book of Genesis says, to get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. So some people had this, religious zeal, I suppose, to go into other places and evangelicalize, I guess. Okay. But all of this was just a smoke screen, really, because what really people hungered for was money, was to get rich, right, and to acquire land. All right. a little piece of their own paradise, as it were. All right. Also, remember the mindset of people around that time, right? You know, there was knowledge, but oh, this far away, distant land, people talking about El Dorado, yes, people talking about Shangri-La and so on. So there was this allure, this appeal of what they call the New World at that time. Okay, so it was no coincidence that the first real beginnings of this whole colonialization process dated from around this time. Okay, many Europeans were seduced by myths about El Dorado and so on, right? And that, we will see, led to a flood of people leaving pretty much England, okay? So Europeans dreamed of owning land and becoming rich, right? In his book, The Treatise of the New India in 1593, Richard Dunn wrote that new lands, beautiful and rich, where there was much gold and a mountain whose sands sparkled with pearls and other riches. So this was the propaganda these people were hearing about the place. Okay. He also talked about strange new people. Some, of course, were agnostic, some friendly. Okay, all essentially rude and barbarous, beastly and fierce, just good enough to Christianize. Yeah, so the message was clear. You see, this here is a picture of Jamaica in 1880, early 1800s,
Yeah,
done by.
You see those spit in it.
Yes.
But
You
other than
see,
that,
so,
the geography don't look familiar at all.
right, so it's, you know, it painted very idyllic place, you know. Okay, so the migration really to the Americas started as a trickle and then eventually became a flood. All right. You know, so in 1607 it was a trickle. It went a stream by 1629 and a flood in 1640 when about 100,000 people left England. Now think about that. England only had a population of 5 million at that time. Okay, right? So we're talking a significant part of the population, right? By 1700, 700,000 people, or 17% of the English population, had migrated. Okay, some went to the US, Newfoundland. Okay, some went to Virginia, some came to the Caribbean, and others went down south to Guyana and other places. Okay, all right. So this here too, this graphic is also from that time. All right. Okay. Now, meanwhile, what was going on with African people? All right. And Equiano, of course, had his experience, which he now tells. Okay. And he says, if I may read, remember when we left him, he had just arrived on the boat. Okay. He was tossed up in the air and so on at 11 years old. Okay. So here's what he says. He says that I've never seen among any people such instances of brutal cruelty. And this is not only shown towards us blacks, but also to some of the whites themselves. One white man in particular I saw, when we were permitted to be on deck, I guess was flogged so unmercifully with a large rope near the foremast that he died in consequence of it. And they tossed him over the side as they would have done a brute. This made me fear these people more, and I expected nothing less than to be treated in the same manner. So he's telling himself, if you could treat one of your own, like this guy here, I got this from Mutiny on the Bounty actually. If you ever saw that movie, one of the brilliant movies, Marlon Brando and so on. Okay, you whip you with the cat o' nine tails until your back was literally bloodied. Okay, so he's still on the port. He hasn't left yet, and this is what is going on to your own people. Right, so he says here, at last when the ship we were in had got all its cargo, all right, they made ready with many fearful noises, and they were all put under the deck. So we could not see how they managed the vessel. But this disappointment was the least of my grief, the stench of the whole, while we were on the coast, was so intolerably loathsome that it was dangerous to remain there for any time. Okay, and some of us had been permitted to stay on the deck for fresh air. But now that the whole ship's cargo were confined together, it was absolutely pestilential. Okay, the closeness of the place, the heat of the climate added to the number in the ship being so overcrowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself, almost suffocated us. So you could imagine something like going on in this picture up here. This produced odious perspiration, so that the air soon became unfit for respiration from a variety of loathsome smells, okay, and brought on a sickness among the slaves, of which many died, thus falling victim to improvident avarice, as I may call it, for their purchasers. This deplorable situation was again aggravated by the galling of the chains. Remember, people were chained, okay, now become insupportable, and the filth of the necessary tubs. Remember these tubs here from the video? The necessary, this is shitting basically. Okay, the filth of the necessary tubs in which the children often fell and were often almost suffocated. The shrieks of the woman and the groan of the dying rendered it a scene of horror almost inconceivable. Okay, so this is what they were experiencing, right? And they're just moving off on this boat. Yeah? Somebody had asked the question, why it is, you would treat a product that you are going to sell in such a terrible manner. Okay, we will get to that speaks to our mindset. Okay, so whilst they're in the middle of the Atlantic, one day when we had a smooth sea and a moderate wind, two of my wearied countrymen who were chained together, I was near them at the time, preferring death to such a life of misery, somehow made through the nettings. They had nettings so that people wouldn't jump into the sea. So these people made it, through the nettings, right? And jumped into the sea. Immediately, another quite dejected fellow, who on account of his illness was suffered to be out of irons, also followed their example. And I believe many, many more would have very soon have done the same if they had not been prevented by the ship's crew, who were instantly alarmed. Okay? Those of us who were the most active were in a moment put under the deck. So they push everybody under the deck, okay? Lock them up. And there was such a noise and confusion among the people of the ship as I had never heard before. To stop her, I am assuming as a woman, he said a man earlier, and get the boat out and go after the slaves. However, two of the wretches were drowned, but they got the other and afterwards flogged him unmercifully for thus attempting to prefer death to slavery. Okay, so this is what was going on then. So at last, they came in sight of the island of Barbados, at which the whites on board gave a great shout and many made signs of joy to us. We did not know what to think of this, but as the vessel drew nearer, we plainly saw the harbor and other ships of different kinds and sizes, and we soon anchored, off Bridgetown. Many merchants and planters came on board, though it was in the evening. They put us in separate parcels, come to that in a second, and examined us, attentively. They made us jump and point to the land, signifying we were to go there. We thought by this, we should be eaten by these ugly men as they appeared to us. Okay, so that was the situation of many, many people, in fact, coming across the Atlantic on that leg of the Middle Passage. Okay, what happened when they actually arrived on shore? Okay, so on reaching the Americas and the Caribbean, clearly the crew had to prepare these people for sale. Okay, they would wash them down, shave them, rub them down with palm oil, which they would have gotten off the African coast. Okay, to disguise sores and wounds and other things. Okay, the captain usually sold their captives directly to planters or specialized wholesalers by auction. Now, I want to introduce you to this guy here, Thomas Thistlewood, okay, who is somewhat unique in Caribbean history. Okay, Thistlewood was a Britisher, okay, poor, generally educated, not aristocrat by any means, just a normal middle class guy, okay, came to Jamaica, okay, and he first started an overseer and then worked his way up as a plantation owner and whatever, okay. What distinguishes this particular guy in Caribbean history is that he kept a diary for pretty much every day from his arrival to his death, okay? And he had copiously recorded everything that he had done, okay? So in terms of a complete history of life on the plantation and the brutality that these people, including himself, right, had done to other people, all of it is clearly recorded in Thistlewood's diary, which you can get on the internet now, if you really look for it, all right? We'll come back to Thistlewood in a minute. All right, so off the ship, people now had to deal with the auction block, all right? And if you look at this picture here, you would see several things that would, stand out to you in terms of what went on at auction. You would notice how, how the baby is treated. You know what I'm saying? How, the woman is probably pleading for her child, okay? And nobody really gives, a damn really. You'll notice the guy with the ever-present whip around, okay? So people had to undergo this frightening experience, okay? Families were separated, often never to see each other again. If you formed bonds with people on the slave ship, that you were traveling with for for 2 to 3 months, those things were broken, okay? All right, now, what happened to the people who were not bought? Because you would think that, okay, people would choose the best, all right? Okay, the people who were not bought were like the dregs, the spoiled ones. We will buy them cheaply, okay? And oftentimes, these people would be worked to death, really, okay? So you would pay less for them and work them to death. Now, the thing is, coming back to Thistlewood, in one of, in part of his diary, in one of his diaries, Thistlewood expresses tremendous anger, how he went to one of these auctions, okay, only to realize that people had chosen, that selected farmers, selected plantation owners, had already gone on board these ships on the docks and chosen the best people, the healthiest looking people, or people like, people were parceled, by origin. So Ashanti people on one side, Yoruba people on the next side, and so on. Okay? And later on, you realize that the planters went there with a mindset, okay? Like if I had Yoruba people on my plantation, I would go there looking for Ashanti people or Kru people so that I will have a mix of people. on my plantation rather than just people from one, you know, tribal community. So yeah, this is what happened. All right. So I was looking at the prices that people paid for people. All right. So I found this price of slaves. So in 1674, people paid about $13.41 on average for somebody coming off the boat. In 100 years later, it was about $49.10. Okay, compared to the price of a ton of sugar, you'll realize that the price of people were pretty much always less than how much they actually got for a ton of sugar. Okay, and they were making tons and tons and tons of sugar. You see what I'm saying? Right? So this is what happened pretty much in the British Caribbean.
Roger,
Okay? Mm-hmm.
is that dollars or shillings, man?
That's dollars in dollars today.
In present day. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. In the US, it was a different scenario. All right. In the US, the price was more because people had to travel further. Okay. And in some cases, people were transported from the Caribbean already, quote unquote, seasoned. And I'll talk about that in a second. Okay. So this is the price of people in the US, about 10 times more, pretty much. Right, from about $250 per person to about $500. Okay, per person. All right. So they were a little more expensive, and because of this too, right? You had a lot of inter-regional slave trading within the borders of the United States. All right.
Roger, can you go to the previous slide, please?
Okay, this one here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I was looking at, there was a significant dip in the price. Go to the next one. I was trying to figure out what accounted for that. For that one, and then go to the next one.
Yeah, I did notice before I go to that one, I did notice there was a spike in the price of sugar around 1710. And I also noticed that there was a concomitant dip in the price of people in around the same time. Okay. The next one, around 1710, pretty much it was low, but in this case in the US, remember they were doing cotton in the USA rather than sugar cane.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what exactly is the reason why this one dipped in 1733. If 1733, there was also a sort of dip. You know, it wasn't high at all. You know, it was just generally stabling around 1734, 1733. In fact, it went down a little bit in the Caribbean. Okay, the price of it. What is also instructive is that the price of sugar also took a big dip in 1730. I might ask that question why that was. Anyways, so that was generally the price people paid for people. All right. Now,
It's probably when they started introducing beet sugar.
There might be that issue. Okay. So people on the auction block, let us look at the first year or so of people being here. So immediately upon arrival, okay, the owners, the plantation owners sought to obliterate people's identity, break their will, and sever any bonds that they had with their past. Okay, that was a very deliberate thing. Okay, they forced Africans to accept, to adapt the new working and living conditions, and to learn a new language and adopt new customs and get accustomed to a new climate as well. They call this process seasoning. Remember I told you, for the first year or 2 or 3, you were seasoned. Okay? Oftentimes they were brand new. as their possession. Okay, now this practice was eventually reduced, and it was reduced because, you know, if you brand somebody, you take possession of them for their life, right? If you give them to somebody else, they have, you know, your brand on them. So, you know, you cannot resell, their resale value drop. Okay, so basically that's why it is people were, this practice diminished in future years. Okay, now seasoning. All right, a lot of people died during the seasoning process. Right, in Cuba, 7 to 12% of the people died during the seasoning process. In Jamaica, it was almost as high as 1/3. And similarly, in Brazil, it was like 1/4 of the people died during the whole seasoning process. Okay, so let us look at the seasoning process, what was involved in the seasoning process. Okay, the seasoning process, a lot of hard work and violence, basically. Okay, so people were regularly beaten. Okay, they were maimed. Like I said, a lot of them were branded. Okay, they were forced to do laborious work, right? And they were often placed in solitary confinement. Okay, what you may not have known, okay, is that, of course, people would rebel against this, Lawrence. Yeah, right? And there was something in Jamaica called buck breaking, where the men were actually sodomized in front of everybody. Okay, right? This is probably accounts for why Jamaican people are extremely homophobic now. Okay, all right. So that was part of the seasoning process. Imagine you are a man going through this experience, yeah, to break your will. All right. All right. Changes in diet, of course. Now you have to get accustomed to whatever diet you are being fed, mainly flour, something that doesn't exist on the African continent. You know, corn is not something that exists on the African continent. They use something called maize. I was, you know, curious as to what is the difference. You know, but when I was in Namibia, people refer to corn as pig food, basically, because it's yellow, but the maize that they use over there is almost white. Okay, so unaccustomed to this diet, enslaved people often experience dropsy and diarrhea and widespread malnutrition. And finally, they had very tight living quarters without ventilation, sufficient food or water. Okay, so underfed and exposed to a new climate, many are forced and forced hard labor. Many slaves succumb to smallpox disease, measles, influenza, and so on. So you had a high rate of death pretty much. But if you survive the seasoning process, you could earn a high price if you are resold. Okay? Probably which accounts for why, you know, the US prices were almost 10 times as much. Okay, so let's now